talking about the end of Title 42 and the national security problems this poses, and we see the mayor of New York asking for $1 billion because of 30,000 illegal migrants that city has taken in. When we talked about the idea that this is now that every state and every city is a border city of the United States, depending on the amount of migrants that have been dumped off in your city. And with really sometimes nowhere to go, no resources, it's getting colder across the country. As it gets colder across the country, the resources cost more to keep these people in somewhat humane conditions, if you can even call them that. So let me go to the phone first. Rick Grenell's joining us too. Let me go to Warren in Idaho has been holding on. Hey, Warren, welcome to Sekulow. You're on the air.
Hey, thanks, guys, for taking my call. And yeah, I have family that lives, and I grew up south of Tucson, and they still live down there, and they get inundated so bad with the migrants coming up. But now with lifting of 42 and what a boss was saying, maybe going back to terrorism, how much does that open up the border crossings to those type of terrorists besides just the cartels?
No,
I mean, we're seeing deaths and everything.
Warren, you raised a really good point. Joining us is our senior advisor on these issues, and that is Rick Grenell, who was on the former president's cabinet and the director of national intelligence. Rick, Warren raises a good point. The administration's lifting Title 42 on next Wednesday. The implications on this are gigantic. There's a group of over 1,000 coming to the border right now. Warren asked the question, what does this do?
Well, look, I think the reality is that if you're an immigrant, I don't care where you're from, it's no longer just Mexico, but an immigrant anywhere in the world, you've heard loud and clearly that the Biden administration is not only going to let you come into the United States through the southern border, but you're going to be able to fly to a whole bunch of different cities, immediately get a whole bunch of NGO given cell phones and housing vouchers. This is a crisis because we have millions of people who are waiting in line to do the right thing legally to come into this country. And we have hundreds of millions of people that want to come into this country. And if you don't have rules, then you don't have a country. And I also want to just finish by saying this to every single listener. We should never feel guilty about having a closed border because the United States of America and its taxpayers are the most generous people in the world when it comes to immigration. Roughly 1 million people a year get to become legal citizens of this country. Unlike any other country in the world, no other country allows 1 million people a year to become citizens. We just have to have rules because we have hundreds of millions of people that want to come in.
You know, Rick, I want to switch to the COVID story because we just briefly mentioned it today on the broadcast so far. And I think it's really just a preview of what's to come with the House Republican majority and people like Jim Jordan. So the House Intelligence Committee, Republicans of that committee have alleged in a new report that there are indications that COVID-19 could be tied to China's biological weapons research program and spilled over to the general human population during an incident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that they are going to focus in on this investigation, which so far you've had a couple of these investigations go. Neither have led that far to that specific of a conclusion. How important is it, though, you think that they're already starting with the I guess their starting point is, was this a biological weapon that spilled over to the wrong lab?
Look, I think that there has been a hesitancy by the media and by the UN and by the United States government to really figure out what exactly happened. We know that the intelligence community believes that it was in the lab, and whether it was a mistake or on purpose, we've never really gotten to the bottom of it. And there needs to be an investigation. And the reason why is because we need to make sure it never happens again. I don't believe Dr. Fauci is been honest with us because it was his agency that approved the money. So you can't go to the guy who approved the money to say, was the money spent wisely? Or what did you actually fund? That's got to be an outside independent third party. And we've never had a demonstration from the U.S. government that they're willing to be transparent and independent. And so I think it's important for Congress to do this. I've spoken to Senator Rand Paul about this. He is extremely focused on it. He wants to get to the bottom of it. He just wants to know the truth. And he hasn't been able to find it yet. And so I think that we will see great things from Rand Paul. I just spoke to him 2 weeks ago about this subject, and he is not stopping. He is laser focused on getting to the truth.
And we've talked to the senator, too. I mean, he's very concerned about this, as we all are, because like you said, Rick, the thing you want to prevent is this ever happening again. I lost my brother to COVID. So, I mean, this, I don't want to see this again. And the countless ramifications of all this are unreal. I want to go back to the border, though, because as I'm monitoring things while we're on the air live. I mean, let me read you the headline, Rick. Flood warning, El Paso migrant surge breaking point, border agents lash out at Homeland Security. This is how serious this situation is, Rick.
Look, we had all the way through the midterm election near silence from Democrats because they didn't want to upset the election. But since then, since the election, we've had a couple of Democrats who have stood up to say this policy is a disaster. Now, I'm not going to go crazy with complimenting Democrats who waited until after the election to say something. However, I do believe that the tipping point is right here in front of us.
Yes.
You've got Kristen Sinema, who has abandoned the Democratic Party largely over a lack of enforcement on the Arizona border. You've now got congressmen in Texas, Democrats, who are standing up and saying, I've been begging the Biden administration to do something. I don't understand why politics trumps national security, because it's clear that the Biden team doesn't want to admit that the border is a disaster and porous, and we've got all these people coming over because they don't want to admit that their policy isn't working because they don't want to lose elections. So now what we have is national security being threatened because of politics.
Let me play for our audience. This is Senator James Lankford, a friend of ours who's been on this broadcast many times. We were just with him in Washington a couple of weeks ago. He said this to us when we had our discussion with him, but this is what he's now said publicly. Take a listen.
I have asked Department of Homeland Security, when the pandemic ends, how are you going to handle the flood at the border when Title 42 goes away? And they've said, we've got a plan, we've got a plan, we've got a plan. They don't have a plan. As of now, next week on Wednesday, Title 42 will go away. I had a briefing with my team to be able to talk with Homeland Security today, to be able to talk about what is their plan for when Title 42 ends next week. And they basically said, we don't have a plan.
This is, we got 1,000 people in a caravan coming to the southern border right now. We've got, as the caller said previously, Rick, we got, Mahmoud Abbas threatening terrorism again. We know they try to get him in through our porous borders. So this is when you were the DNI. I mean, obviously, I'm not asking for information that was classified, but when you were the DNI, you were dealing with this every day.
Yeah, there's no question that this is a national security issue, that we know through intelligence gathering that this is not just a Mexican problem. That this is not just Mexicans trying to come over into the United States. The word is out around the world. You can be in Kazakhstan, you can be in an Arab country, you can be from Africa, and you know now that you can fly in to Mexico City, make your way up, and come into the United States, a completely porous border. This is not political. This is a national security crisis that Joe Biden is totally ignoring. And what we have to do is we have to hold people accountable, Jay.
We're in court on that right now, Rick, by the way, just so you remember, we're in court on that right now, but you're right. We do have to hold him accountable.
And Secretary Mayorkas needs to be the first one to go. He clearly is in over his head. He doesn't know what he's doing, but there's a whole bunch of political people in the cabinet that are protecting him. I mean, where are the other political people who care about America and America's national security? Why aren't they speaking up? This is an issue. I will say this, too. The reason why Governor Newsom and Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi haven't spoken up about this, all Californians, is because we have a wall in California. It works. You'll notice that this is all about Arizona and Texas.
Yes.
They don't have the wall. We were able to get the wall in California because we had powerful politicians who made sure that we had a wall in California. There's a full wall on the border with Mexico for California.
I mean, Rick, Jim George just tweeted, Title 42 ends on December 20th. After that, expect nearly 14,000 illegal aliens to enter our border each day. That would equate to over 400,000 illegal aliens in a single month. that's larger than the population of New Orleans.
Which is exactly why the American Center for Law and Justice is in federal court against the Department of Homeland Security to get to the bottom of all this lack of planning. Rick, we appreciate you being with us as always as part of our team.